So, as mentioned, I'm Hannah Durkin. We talk a lot about censorship in our world, and too often it's associated with bad and negative things. Only this morning I was talking with my dad before I came to the conference, and he commented that they're trying to pass a law in the Duma which will increase censorship in some aspects of newspapers. And my dad was, well, not exactly complimentary towards this. It's too often we find that in our modern world. People too often say, censorship is bad, it limits our development, censorship is horrible, how could they do this? And yes, sometimes it is bad. But there is a lot of times when we need censorship and when censorship develops us. This is what I'm talking about. In my opinion, there are times when we need censorship to develop our world, and this is when people's lives will be put at risk if we don't have censorship. When people's lives are put at risk, we can have censorship. When people's lives aren't put at risk, it will stop our world developing, and it's a very, very negative thing. So before I start explaining what I mean by this and giving examples, I'd like to make one thing very clear. Because I've been talking to my friends a lot about this topic, and they've been saying, censorship is bad, it limits free speech. Censorship and free speech are not the same thing, and I'd just like to make this very clear. You can define them so they're the same thing, but if that was what my talk was about, I would be here literally for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, trying to decide what they are. So for the purposes of today, we're going to define censorship as the limiting and spreading of knowledge and ideas, and free speech as the stopping of opinions. I have two examples. When I lived in Beijing, and I did for 4 years, there's censorship there and limited free speech. Now, my mum and I went out and we bought a Lonely Planets guide to Beijing. And being us, we were extremely amused to find this. Different sections of the book were TEDxAAS out. Somebody had been sitting there whiting out the phrases that insulted the Chinese government just because they went against ideas. This is censorship. It's information that is being limited and removed. That is censorship. Free speech is when my sister went to a conference, and my sister was an animal rights activist, still is an animal rights activist, and she attended a conference, and 15 people were supposed to speak there. When she got there, only her and another boy were allowed to speak. The government had told the 13 other people that they could not speak on the topic. They were not allowed to share their opinions. This is free speech and limiting free speech. So just to get it clear, they're not the same. Now to censorship. As I mentioned, my opinion is that censorship is good when it's protecting people's lives. Censorship is not good when it doesn't. The reason most people have heard about censorship in the last couple of years is because of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who's the leader of WikiLeaks. They are the perfect example of when we need censorship to protect people's lives. WikiLeaks is on the internet, and it isn't censored. It's very difficult to have it censored. So what they were able to do is release information about things that they found out. What they did that really insulted people was released information about the Afghan war. Now, they didn't just name soldiers, and they didn't just name where people were dying and where they were, but they did other things. They listed translators, they listed soldiers, they listed spies. Now, if I'm a translator in Afghanistan, and my name goes up on that list, and it's been found out I'm helping the British government or the American government, I'd be pretty terrified. The Taliban found out about this, and the Taliban's spokesperson, because apparently the Taliban has a spokesperson, commented that they would be looking into the names and dealing with it as they saw fit. I'm not going to decide what the Taliban did. I'm not going to decide whether the Taliban had honorable intentions with these people. But all I'm saying is it was not right to release this information. And they did more than that. I'm a 15-year-old girl. I had to ask how to use this. I am not good at technology. Yet I managed to find that, and that, and that. That's information about Iraq, the war in Iraq. I typed into Google, WikiLeaks, and came up with that. I now know what this was about, where the American government had put their people, where the soldiers were, where they were attacking. I don't need to know this, and by me knowing this, well, nothing's going to happen. But by people who have power to change this, by them knowing it, it's putting people's lives at risk. This cannot continue. This should have been censored. If it hadn't been for WikiLeaks, this would have been censored. Other examples of when censorship protects people's lives: witness protection schemes. In this room, every single one of you may be in a witness protection scheme, and I don't know about it. Quite frankly, I don't want to know about it. Because the reason people enter witness protection schemes is because they say their lives are in so much risk without them that they could die. They think they're going to die because they give up everything to get into one of these schemes with the fear that they're going to die. If you release their names, that may happen. Just type into Google, witness protection schemes fails, and you will find name after name after name of people who were killed because their names were released. The government has the right to censor this. We don't need to know it. And the government doesn't need to tell us this. We need to protect those people. A third example, which of course I imagine all of you have thought of when we need censorship, state secrets. Coming back to the war, if the government is entering a war zone, it could get so much more complicated if information fell into the wrong hands, and if people knew about where they were going, what they were doing, who was being killed. This wasn't good. This isn't good. So next time your government does this and puts censorship on a piece of information, and it's to do with a war or a witness protection scheme, please respect that, because they have a reason behind it. There is a reason that they're trying to save that and save that information from you. Of course, that's when censorship is good, when it's protecting people's lives. But of course, I love criticizing governments, and governments are not always right. Governments are not always right to censor information, because some information, quite frankly, we do need to know, or at least deserve to know. Coming back to WikiLeaks, because I've criticized WikiLeaks a lot, but WikiLeaks has some good points. For those of you who know me, I'm not the biggest fan of Sarah Palin, and I was thrilled when WikiLeaks released this. That was an email sent from her personal Yahoo account concerning work affairs. I'm not very familiar with US laws, but apparently this is against the law. If you're going to make a decision, and if you're being told that you have to vote for somebody, wouldn't you like to know if they're breaking some kind of law referring to sending work-related emails to your private email account? I think that's somewhat important, and that's when we don't need censorship, because that had been covered up, or at least it hadn't been shared, and it needs to be shared. There are countless other examples of this. If you investigate WikiLeaks and look under people there, you'll find that the British National Party in the UK, WikiLeaks released members of that party, including policemen. It's actually against the law in the UK for policemen to sign up to a political party. So they'd broken the law. Releasing this information didn't put anybody's lives at risk, but helped reveal something that should not have been hidden. This is when censorship is bad. It shouldn't have been hidden. So the fact that WikiLeaks had no censorship on that, and that WikiLeaks could reveal that into this world, was an amazing, amazing, brilliant thing. So when it's referring to politics and official people, it's important that we don't have censorship on them, censorship covering mistakes they may have made, or even censorship covering wonderful things they did. I don't know, maybe Sarah Palin did an amazing, amazing thing that was hidden up and it should be released and shouldn't have censorship on it. I don't know. Another example of when we don't need censorship. Well, many, 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 many years ago, there was a man, and he came up with this crazy theory. Completely psychopathic, people thought. How could he think this? People absolutely hated this idea. This was the man, Galileo. He came up with the idea that the Earth went round the sun, not the universe went going around the Earth. And it was censored. It was censored not because people's lives were at risk, but because people didn't like the idea. This should not have been censored. Imagine how much quicker we would have been able to discover things about our world if this hadn't been censored. We're studying the atom and the discovery of the atom in physics. In the discovery of the atom, the reason people evolved, the reason that we discovered that the atom had protons, neutrons, and electrons, was because people were insulted. Somebody released the theory, people were deeply, deeply insulted about it, and felt the need to prove them wrong. So they found out something else. And then the other team got deeply, deeply insulted, so found out something else. And this was the way the world improved. This is the way our science improved. Not censoring the information that they thought was wrong, and was somewhat wrong, led to right discoveries being made, and led to information that we desperately needed being made. If you censor ideas because they're against your beliefs, or if you censor ideas because they somewhat insult you, but don't put anybody's lives at risk, you're stopping the development. You're stopping the development of the world. Nowadays, of course, we say, Galileo Galilei, he was a genius. I wouldn't have censored him. But you need to think that there's a modern-day version of Galileo Galilei, and we need to realize and find out who that person is, and not censor him. Now, what do all of these books have in common, apart from them all being written in English? In some way or another, every single one of these books was censored. Racial, drinking, murder, violence, witchcraft, still not quite certain, and racial. Even Captain Underpants was censored. I'm not quite certain why you'd want to censor Captain Underpants. Maybe because it teaches to go against your principle. And while I can understand Mr. Sexton wouldn't like that, we still need to defend these books with their crazy ideas. We still need to fight up for things like Captain Underpants. Because all of these books are great works of literature, or at least popular works of literature. I'm not saying if you can call Captain Underpants great works of literature. And having these books in our world help us to understand things. Harry Potter is a great introduction to kids to fiction, to this world, and to fiction and to imaginary worlds. It is a great way that starts people reading. This was one of the first books I really loved. It got me reading. To Kill a Mockingbird is a great example of a historic time in the United States. It helps people learn about it. The Hunger Games teaches us about violence and why we shouldn't be violent. They all have messages in them, and they all have important things we need to learn. If we're going to be picky and say, oh yes, but you see Harry Potter has witches in it, so we can't like that, we'll never go anywhere. We'll never learn anything, and people will never be happy. We'll also never have great works of literature anymore, because I bet you there is not a single book in this world that does not have somebody who is insulted by some sentence or some word or some phrase or some spelling in it. So, in conclusion, there are times when we need to censor. These are times when people are in danger. These are times when people are in danger. These are times when people's lives need to be respected. The Afghan war journals should not have been released online. Witness protection schemes we should not know about. We may want to know about, and that's all right. We maybe have a deep, burning curiosity to learn about this, but we need to respect that we don't need to know about it, and we shouldn't know about it. We need to respect our governments when they tell us not to know. And sometimes, when our governments tell us not to read Harry Potter or not to read Captain Underpants, we need to realize that this has no merit. And we need to realize that this is when we should fight up for our rights, this is when we should object, and this is when we should go ahead and go against censorship. So I hope you realize censorship is not black, censorship is not white, censorship is a whole bunch of gray. Thank you.